Hey, what's going on, Headliner Nation? Welcome back to the Fantasy Headliners. Let's dive into our Week 14 waiver wire targets. A lot of you are heading into the playoffs right now. Maybe your playoffs are starting, maybe they start in a week, maybe they've already started, depends on your league formats. But whatever it may be, if you're in the playoffs or fighting for a spot right now, it is absolutely pivotal that you have your roster ready to get through the ups and downs of the playoffs. And we have got several guys here in this episode to talk about that could help you towards achieving that ultimate goal of winning a fantasy football championship. So let's get ready to turn in those waiver wire targets for week 14. And we're going to kick it off and talk about running backs, because at this point in the season, running back is the absolute most crucial position to be holding on to and to have players on your roster ready to fill in. So my targets this week at running back, we're going to start off with Ty Johnson of the New York Jets. Frank Gore going down with that injury means that Ty Johnson is probably going to step in as that number one guy, 0% owned, going up against Seattle this coming week. The Gore injury, P. Ryan is still on the IR. After both of those two things happened, Ty Johnson last week, 22 attempts for 104 yards and a touchdown. He has got to be one of the most sought after waiver wire commodities this week. So if he's available in your league, which he should be, if you are thin at running back, you have got to be putting in a waiver claim for Ty Johnson. How long will that last? I don't know. Is he going to get 22 rushing attempts again against Seattle? Probably not. But again, it's all about reinforcing your roster right now and making sure that you have the guys that you need to get through the playoffs. For Atlanta, Ito Smith is going to be a big add this week. And honestly, with the news that Todd Gurley's knee injury is kind of popping up again, Ito Smith is going to be my Manscaped must-add of the week. For Ito Smith, over the last couple of weeks, with Todd Gurley being out and not looking great, Ito Smith has actually been a little bit more of a value pickup than what Brian Hill has been. Now, moving forward, looking at next week, maybe that changes, but they are going up against the Chargers, a team that's coming off a very poor performance last week. If Atlanta gets themselves in any kind of a positive game script, or if they get themselves in any type of neutral game script, they can continue to run with Ito Smith. And even with Gurley back last week, he had another 8 carries and led the team in rushing and added 2 targets on top of that. So this week, I am going to go with Ito Smith as my Manscaped must-add. Now, remember, if you head over to manscaped.com and use the code word headliners, you're going to get 20% off all of their great products plus free shipping. So again, manscaped.com, code word headliners, all capital letters. You get 20% off and free shipping. Ito Smith, my Manscaped must-add of the week. Cam Akers from the Los Angeles Raiders. Now, Los Angeles Rams, excuse me. Here's the thing about Cam Akers. More than likely, actually, the next 2 names on the list, so we'll talk about them together, Cam Akers and Damian Harris. Their ownership percentages are pretty high, 34%, 47%. More than likely in a majority of the leagues of you listening right now in which that you're going into the playoffs or battling for a playoff spot, these guys might not even be available. But because they're under 50% owned based on accumulation of many sites, got to add them in here and just make sure that you are aware that if they are available, you can go get them. For Cam Akers, he finally took the majority of the workload last week, getting 21 carries, and he's probably the safest bet in this backfield in Los Angeles right now to get a decent amount of carries. Darrell Henderson, still getting a lot of touches, is going to limit Cam Akers' upside, but he might be the guy the rest of the season. For Damian Harris in New England, it's clear New England wants to continue to run the ball, keep it away from their opponents, and really just control the game by doing that. And even with Sony Michel back last week, Harris was the lead back. Now, if you look at the game, if you just look at the box score, you're going to say, Kyle, but what about the score? Obviously, Harris probably got a lot of work because of the score. Actually, to begin the game, Harris was getting almost every single carry out of the backfield. So it wasn't like it just happened because of the score. It happened because of him getting so many, or it happened early in the season that or early in the game that he was getting so many touches. So he was still getting the touches. And then Michelle is the one that kind of worked in later on when the game got out of control. So Damien Harris is still a good pickup. For the Washington football team, J.D. McKissic, Peyton Barber both getting added here. Unknowing what's happening with Antonio Gibson. Now, this is being recorded after that game. We don't have a whole lot of knowledge at this point. How long Antonio Gibson may be out for? Is it going to be for a while? Is it just going to be for a week? Will he be able to get back next week? No idea as of this recording. J.D. McKissic was a popular option earlier in the year. I mean, he's still around 34% owned right now. He's going to be your option in PPR and half PPR leagues. I mean, you got another 10 targets last week in that game, or this past week in that game. So he continues to be a solid option. Going up against San Francisco last week, we'll probably see a decent amount of targets. For Peyton Barber, he's kind of an emergency option. I mean, he's not going to be very efficient on the ground. The hope is if you were to put Peyton Barber in your lineup, you get a touchdown. I'm not really going to be banking on that, but if you're in a deeper league or you're really hurting for running backs and there's not many available, you could always grab Peyton Barber and at least keep him on your bench. My last option here, your starting running back handcuffs. Now, there's going to be a lot of pundits out there that are going to argue with you that you don't own your own handcuffs. You own handcuffs of players on other teams. But here's the thing. This late in the season, going into the playoffs, you need to add your running back handcuffs. I mean, Dalvin Cook is a prime example. Alexander Madison goes down. You can run out and get like an Amir Abdullah or something right now if you really wanted to. But at this point in the season, you can't make any trades, and the waiver wires are going to be very, very thin. So while I get if you own the handcuffs of other running backs, if those running backs go down, now you have somebody. But what if those running backs don't go down and your running backs do? Now you don't have anybody. If you own your running back handcuffs right now for your starters, then you're set. Because if a running back goes down over the next couple of weeks, boom, you have a plug-and-play starter at that point, which is what you need right now, considering you can't make any trades and the waiver wire is going to be extremely thin. So for those of you who have deeper benches or have the opportunity or availability to add some of your running back handcuffs, do it. If you're a Zeke owner, add like a Tony Pollard. If you're a Dalvin Cook owner, add, if you want to add like an Amir Abdullah or a Mike Boone or something like that, take a look at that and make your best guess there. With Josh Jacobs, obviously owning Devontae Booker, nobody did. Nobody owned Devontae Booker for the most part. He's over 50% owned now, so I can't include him in this video, but Jacobs might miss another week. That's the same thing here. You got to make sure. For like a Cam Akers, if you own a Cam Akers, you got to own a Darrell Henderson, because if one of those guys go down, now you have the guy that's going to step in. So, and we just saw it with Antonio Gibson. He goes down, J.D. McKissic, Peyton Barber. If you would have owned J.D. McKissic already, you're set, you're golden, you're ready to roll. But if you didn't, you might be in a little bit of trouble. So running back handcuffs this late in the season is absolutely a priority to own. Let's go ahead and switch it over and go over to wide receiver now. Gabriel Davis from Buffalo, another great game from him. Again, anytime John Brown misses, it's almost a lock that Gabriel Davis is going to see a touchdown. Didn't quite get to that 70 yards, but over his last 3 starts, he has 68 or more yards and at least a touchdown in every single game. So he's been getting the looks, he's been getting the yards and the touchdowns when there's no John Brown. And he's still under 1% owned. For that game, for that Buffalo-San Francisco game, I absolutely hammered the plus 260 anytime score bet, prop bet for Gabriel Davis, and it ended up hitting huge. So Gabriel Davis going up against Pittsburgh next week, a great option to add. Jakeem Grant from Miami, under 1% owned as well, going up against Kansas City. He has at least 5 targets in 5 of the last 6 weeks, and maybe he's becoming, kind of an option there for Tua, kind of a comfortable option. Again, I mentioned it a couple of weeks ago when Jakeem Grant was on this video. Those two had a lot of opportunity to connect over the offseason, not really over the offseason, but the beginning of the season, because Jakeem Grant was running with the second team, and so was Tua. So they've been running together for quite a bit to begin the season. There might be a little bit of chemistry there. For Kiki Cutie at 5.1% owned, I'm not sure how more people didn't jump on him last week. Now, the Will Fuller suspension, that news came after the waiver wire video, so I wasn't able to include Kiki Cutie in that. but you got to go get him now. If he is still in your waivers, you got to go pick him up. Yeah, they're going up against Chicago, a tough defense next week. I don't care. Not enough people pounced last week. He led Houston with 9 targets, 8 receptions, and 141 yards. Now, am I expecting those numbers every single week? No, I'm not. But he's still a guy that you got to own. T.Y. Hilton from Indianapolis, 38% owned now, going up against Las Vegas this week. Over the last 2 weeks, he's got 16 targets. He's caught 12 of those for 190 yards and 2 touchdowns. Are we working our way back with T.Y. Hilton? I mean, it took 12 weeks for them to finally figure out what was going on there, but maybe T.Y. Hilton is going to be a guy that's not going to necessarily be a league winner down the stretch, but a guy that will really help you towards a fantasy championship down the stretch. Rashard Higgins from Cleveland at 1.3% owned. They're throwing the ball enough right now that he could keep seeing 7 to 9 targets a game. Last week, he had 9 targets, 6 receptions, 95 yards, and a touchdown. Are they going to be... They don't want to throw the ball this much. The game plan is run the ball with Chubb and Hunt. However, going up against Baltimore, they're going to have to throw the ball a lot. They did it against Tennessee last week, and they're doing it pretty well right now, too. So, Baker Mayfield's got some decent upside. Rashard Higgins is going to have to be included in that as well. Colin Johnson from Jacksonville, his second straight week on this show, 0.1% owned, going up against Tennessee this week, a team that absolutely just got blasted by Cleveland in the passing game. Over the last 2 weeks, he's caught 8 of 14 targets for 162 yards, and it is clear that Glennon is looking his way. He might be that number 2 right now to DJ Chark. And obviously DJ Chark's been a little bit banged up lately. So if DJ Chark were to miss, then Colin Johnson becomes even more valuable. Kind of the same thing that we're talking about with Jalen Reagor and Greg Ward when it comes to Colin Johnson. This late in the season, if you have an opportunity to add guys that are the number 1 target on their team, even if the team isn't performing that well, even if you don't really trust the quarterback, you still add guys like that for the possibility of getting into a game script and a matchup that allows them to kind of execute that game plan and bring you some fantasy points. So Colin Johnson against Tennessee is going to be a good matchup. For Philadelphia with Jalen Reagor and Greg Ward, they're going to be, who's going to be the number 1 there? It's going to be one of those guys. Is Jalen Hurts going to be the starter? I'm not advocating for you to go out and grab Jalen Reagor or Greg Ward right away, but if Hurts is the starter now, does that help the offense? Does it kind of move things along? Can they open it up a little bit? Can they do some different things? If they can, maybe that helps Reagor and Ward a little bit. I mean, Reagor, you saw in that punt return last week, the dude's dynamic. He can make moves after the catch. He's got the speed. He can do all those things. For Greg Ward, Hurts was looking Greg Ward's way last week after he came into that game. So for Greg Ward and Jalen Reagor, who's going to battle it out to be that wide receiver 1 in Philadelphia? Maybe they get things turned around if Hurts is going to be the starter the rest of the season. Don't necessarily need to run out and add either of these guys right away, but keep an eye on it because one of them, you could at least stash them. And if you get into a bind, you got a team's wide receiver 1. Tight end continues to be a little bare these days. No, not my tight end. The tight end position in fantasy football. But I've got 3 options for you to take a look at this week. Logan Thomas, who continues to make his way onto this list every single week because people just haven't added him. He's only 14% owned right now, going up against San Francisco next week, coming off a huge win against Pittsburgh. 9 targets, 9 receptions, 98 yards, and a touchdown last week. Huge week for Logan Thomas going up against Pittsburgh last week. Let's see if he can take it and move it over against San Francisco. A little bit of a volatile option, but still a option with nice upside nonetheless. Drew Sample from Cincinnati. I continue to say it. This is a guy that we're keeping our eye on. Maybe we don't start him right away, but my thesis a couple of weeks ago that he might end up being an option with a backup quarterback may end up becoming true at this point. He does have 16 targets over the last 3 weeks, and last week he caught 7 of his 7 targets for 49 yards. So it looks like he is going to be targeted more often down the stretch. He might be a guy going up against Dallas this week that we're going to be starting. And then Anthony Firkser from Tennessee, 2.6% owned, going up against Jacksonville. No Janu. When there's no Janu, he has at least 7 targets. So Anthony Firkser, definitely the safest tight end option on that team. And honestly, if you had Janu and you're looking around the waiver wire right now and you're just trying to add anybody, Anthony Firkser is not a bad option with a safe floor. Maybe not a high ceiling, but a safe floor the rest of the year. All right, now we got to get into the streaming portion of our video here. And let's talk about quarterbacks and defensive streamers for next week. Quarterbacks up first. Sam Darnold from the New York Jets. Now, there's probably going to be a lot of you that are like, I ain't touching anybody on this list. But again, they're streamers. Maybe for one reason or another, you got to stream a quarterback this week. Here are some options that might have a decent outcome for you. Sam Darnold, 0.4% owned. Going up against Seattle, weapons are healthy now, so he's got all of his weapons in the receiving game. There's no real run game. They're going to be throwing it a lot against Seattle. Seattle still has given up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks over the last 4 weeks, so they're a little bit better right now than they have been all season. But it still is not great. So Sam Darnold, maybe this is a guy that you pick up this week and just gives you just barely enough. Drew Lock from Denver, again, not another option that makes you go, ugh. But 2.5% owned, going up against Carolina. Carolina, over the last 4 weeks, they have allowed the 2nd most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. So they are giving up quite a bit of points over the last 4 weeks to quarterbacks. And with Drew Lock, before he had to sit out with that contact tracing with COVID a couple of weeks ago, he had at least 248 yards passing in 5 of his last 5 games. So, before he had to sit out there, he was actually throwing the ball around quite a bit. Now, the touchdowns weren't always there, but the yards were. So again, maybe a decent floor to help you get through the week. And then Mitchell Trubisky, the same thing. Again, none of these options get me super excited, all right? But for Chicago, 8.7% owned, going up against Houston. He has 509 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions since returning as the starter. So again, maybe not anybody that's going to go out and win you your week, but someone that might go out and at least give you enough points to get through the week. For defensive teams this week, only a couple of options that I'm taking a look at. The first one, the New York Giants, a little bit of a risk, 20% owned right now, and they're going up against Arizona. So with Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins, everybody there, they are going to be a tough matchup. However, Arizona has struggled recently, while the New York Giants have been playing very well, actually. And it might be a little bit under the radar right now. But over the last 4 weeks, the Giants have allowed the 4th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers and the 2nd fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. So this defense is actually playing very, very, very well right now. Again, maybe a team that doesn't necessarily win you a week, but helps you get through the week and gets you a few points. For the Titans, going up against Jacksonville at 19.8% owned, this is going to be a little bit of a safer option here. However, that secondary, they're getting a little bit touched right now by the passing game. They're having some trouble stopping the passing game. Glennon's been chucking it quite a bit lately. They've got some weapons, obviously, there at wide receiver that can do some damage on some big plays. So, again, a little bit of a safer option than the Giants, but both of these teams are ones to consider for this week. And that's going to wrap it up. That's my waiver wire show for here in week 14. Again, get your waiver wire claims out there. Things getting pushed back a little bit again this week because, well, we've got 2 Monday night games. We've got a Tuesday night game. The schedule, hopefully, for week 14 just stays on track. And then week 15 and 16, we've got Saturday games again. So, ladies and gentlemen, appreciate you all tuning into this video. Do me a favor, if you appreciate that content, hit that like button down below and leave a question in the comments if you're looking at any players that maybe I didn't mention. And as always, if you're new here to the Fantasy Headliners, hit that subscribe button, become a part of Headliner Nation today. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Appreciate it. Have a great rest of your week. I'll catch you on the next episode. Stay safe, stay healthy, and see you later.